When Sergeant Daniel Miller stepped off the plane and onto the tarmac, the world around him seemed to shift. The sun was brighter than he remembered, almost too bright, casting long shadows across the military base. It had been nearly 4 years since he'd last seen his hometown, 4 years since he'd last felt the comforting weight of normal life. The harshness of war, the relentless sounds of gunfire and explosions, were now distant memories, yet they lingered, haunting his every step. He was supposed to feel relieved. He should have been filled with joy at the thought of returning to his wife and children. But instead, a strange sense of detachment had taken root. As he walked through the airport, he kept his eyes down, adjusting to the unfamiliar rhythm of civilian life. The chatter of people around him seemed foreign, their light conversations about things that no longer felt important to him. The ride home felt even longer than the journey back from overseas. The taxi driver made small talk, but Daniel was too lost in his thoughts to respond. He stared out of the window, trying to process the wave of emotions crashing through him. He had seen things, done things, that no one could understand unless they had been there. His uniform felt like a second skin, one that didn't belong to the man he was now, but rather the soldier he had been. He had been gone for so long that he didn't know how to reconcile the person he had become with the life he had left behind. When they reached his house, the familiar view was a shock. The front door, the worn steps, the creaky porch swing, it all looked the same, but it wasn't. He could feel it in his bones. The house had been quiet when he left, and now, it seemed even quieter. He stepped out of the taxi, his boots heavy on the ground, his heart beating in his chest with every step toward the door. As he reached for the handle, his hand froze. What if things had changed too much? What if he wasn't the same man who had left, and the people inside had moved on without him? He hadn't gotten a letter from his wife in months. The last one he'd received was a hurriedly written note on the back of a postcard, telling him to stay safe. He'd written to her every week, but the letters had stopped coming after a while. With a deep breath, Daniel opened the door. It creaked loudly, echoing in the silence. The house smelled different, cleaner, less familiar. He glanced around the foyer, the photos on the walls, the family portraits that had once brought him so much comfort now felt distant. They didn't belong to him anymore, or at least not to the version of himself that had walked out that morning years ago. "Hello?" he called out softly, but the only response was the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. The house was empty. His chest tightened as he walked through the living room, his steps slow, deliberate. The furniture, the rug on the floor, the old TV, it all looked like it belonged to someone else. He thought he could smell his wife's perfume faintly in the air, but it didn't feel real. It felt like a dream. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a door opening upstairs. The floorboards creaked, and he could hear someone moving around. He stood still, waiting, unsure of what to expect. Was it his wife? His children? The person he was supposed to come back to after everything he'd been through? After everything he'd seen? Then, a figure appeared at the top of the stairs, a woman, tall and slender, with brown hair tied back in a ponytail. She looked down at him, her expression unreadable. For a moment, Daniel didn't recognize her. His mind raced, trying to piece together the details. And then, it hit him, this was his wife, Sarah. But she looked different. Her face was harder now, more mature. There was a distant look in her eyes, one that wasn't there before. "Daniel?" she said softly, her voice tinged with disbelief. He nodded, his throat tight. "Yeah. It's me." Sarah's eyes filled with emotion, but she didn't move. Instead, she looked at him like she was seeing a stranger. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. It had been so long since they had spoken face to face, so long since they had shared the kind of intimacy that came with being in the same room together. He could see the weight of the years on her face, the toll of living without him, the absence of his presence in their lives. I wasn't sure if you were ever coming back," Sarah said quietly, her voice cracking with emotion. "I thought I'd lost you for good." Daniel took a step forward, wanting to bridge the distance between them, but Sarah didn't move. She stood frozen, her eyes locked on his, as if waiting for something, some sign, some reassurance that he was the man he used to be. But he wasn't. Neither of them were. The war had taken that from them. "Sarah," Daniel started, but his voice faltered. He wasn't sure how to start this conversation, what to say. All the words he'd rehearsed in his mind seemed to evaporate. He had been gone for so long. So much had changed, and now he didn't know how to fit back into the life he once knew. "I'm sorry," Sarah whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "I've tried to keep everything together, but I don't know how. It's been so hard, Daniel." Daniel reached out, his hand trembling as he gently took hers. It was a tentative touch, a hesitant gesture, but it felt like the only thing he could do. The space between them was still too wide, too filled with years of absence and pain. But in that moment, as their fingers intertwined, Daniel knew that something had changed. Something deep inside him had shifted, and he didn't know if it was something he could fix. But he had to try. After the long flight, Adam stood at the gates of the airport, his duffel bag slung over his shoulder. It was surreal, the feeling of being back, of stepping onto familiar soil after so long. He had been overseas for nearly 2 years, and now, with every breath, the air felt heavier and yet oddly comforting. The weight of the world seemed to lift as he navigated through the crowded terminal, but the thought of returning home only brought a sense of apprehension. Adam's heart pounded in his chest, unsure of what to expect. He thought of his family, of his wife, Rebecca, and his daughter, Lily. They had both visited him during his deployment, but the conversations were brief, and the connections were strained. The images of their faces, frozen in time, did little to help. He felt the ache of wanting to be a part of their lives again, but the longer he was away, the more distant he had become. The last few months had been especially difficult. The fleeting video calls and rushed text messages couldn't replace the warmth of a real embrace, the sound of laughter around the dinner table. Now, standing in the middle of the airport, he was painfully aware that things would be different. Would Rebecca still look at him the same way? Would Lily remember the sound of his voice when she was only a toddler when he left? How could he simply return to a life that had moved on without him? He caught a glimpse of his reflection in a glass panel, and for a moment, he didn't recognize the man staring back at him. The sharp lines on his face, the graying beard, the eyes filled with a quiet sadness, it wasn't the man he remembered being when he left. In a way, he had left parts of himself behind. With a sigh, he made his way to the exit, stepping into the parking lot. His eyes scanned the crowd, searching for any familiar faces. There was no sign of Rebecca or Lily, which wasn't surprising. They had probably arranged for someone else to pick him up. But as he walked toward the curb, a deep sense of loneliness hit him. He had no idea where to go next, what to expect. Every step was a question mark. The past 2 years had been full of noise, constant, overwhelming, and brutal. He had learned to live within the chaos, to survive, to function without the luxuries of home. But now, in the stillness of the world he used to know, the quiet felt suffocating. What did normal life look like after all that? The weight of his gear felt heavier now, no longer a symbol of duty or purpose, but a reminder of the gap that had grown between him and everything he once took for granted. He had been forced to adapt to the chaos of war, but now, he was faced with the overwhelming task of reintegrating himself into the world he once belonged to. He finally reached the curb, taking a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves. The car wasn't there yet. And in that moment, he realized how much he had missed these small, seemingly insignificant things, the simple act of waiting for a ride, for a moment of normalcy. He tried to picture the life he had left behind, but it felt like a distant memory, a different lifetime. A few minutes later, a black sedan pulled up. The window rolled down, revealing a woman with dark brown hair, tied back in a neat ponytail. It was Rebecca. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. There was a hint of unease in her expression. Adam felt a pang in his chest. Had she been waiting for this moment as anxiously as he had? Or had the waiting already begun to feel like a long, drawn-out goodbye? "Hey," she said softly, her voice betraying the fatigue of years spent waiting. "You made it home." The silence between them was thick, charged with all the years of longing, confusion, and expectations. "Yeah," Adam replied, his throat tightening as he tried to find the words. "I'm home." The car doors opened, and as Adam stepped into the vehicle, he couldn't help but wonder what would come next. Would he be able to pick up the pieces of the life he had left behind? Or had those pieces scattered too far to ever be whole again? The car ride was quiet, the only sound being the hum of the engine as they navigated the streets that Adam once knew so well. The familiar surroundings felt different, almost foreign, like he was looking at his life through a window but couldn't quite reach it. He kept stealing glances at Rebecca, but she never looked back at him. It wasn't like the reunion he had imagined during those long nights in the desert. There were no hugs, no tears of joy, just an uncomfortable silence hanging between them like an invisible barrier. Adam had been imagining this moment for months, even years. The return. The homecoming. The joy of seeing his family again after being apart for so long. But now that it was happening, he wasn't sure what he was supposed to feel. He wasn't sure what he expected, but this wasn't it. The moment felt muted, as if the world around him was moving on without him, and he was stuck, trying to catch up. Rebecca turned onto their street, the house coming into view. It looked the same, with the small garden that Adam had planted before he left and the swing on the porch where Lily used to play. It was all so familiar, yet it felt like it belonged to someone else. Someone who wasn't him. The yard, the house, it all seemed too perfect, too peaceful, like a memory locked away in time. The car came to a stop, and Adam's heart raced. This was it. This was the moment he had dreamed of. Stepping back into his old life. But as he sat there, the weight of everything seemed too much to carry. The thought of reconnecting with Rebecca, of seeing his daughter Lily after all this time, it felt overwhelming. The years of separation, the distance that had grown between them during his deployment, had left marks on all of them. The life they had was different now. And so was he. Rebecca turned to him, her expression unreadable. "Do you want to go inside?" she asked quietly. Adam didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stared at the house, trying to gather the strength to get out of the car. He realized then that he didn't know what he wanted. He didn't know how to return to a life that had moved on without him. He didn't know how to be the man he once was, the man Rebecca married, the father Lily remembered. The house that once felt like a sanctuary now felt like a prison. The memories of their past life, once so vivid, now seemed distant and fragmented, like pieces of a puzzle that no longer fit together. "I guess," Adam muttered, his voice strained. He opened the door and stepped out, the weight of his military boots on the soft grass, the familiar smell of his neighborhood air wrapping around him. It should have felt comforting, but all he could feel was the emptiness in the pit of his stomach. Rebecca opened the door to the house and stepped inside. Adam followed behind her, his heart pounding in his chest. As they walked into the living room, Adam saw the pictures on the walls, the ones of him and Rebecca, of him holding Lily when she was a baby. Everything was the same, yet so different. "Lily's in her room," Rebecca said, her voice distant, like she was speaking to a stranger. "You can go see her." Adam's legs felt heavy as he walked down the hallway, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the empty house. He stopped in front of Lily's door and paused. It felt like an eternity had passed since he last saw her. He placed his hand on the doorknob, his fingers trembling slightly. Inside, Lily was sitting at her desk, scribbling something in a notebook. She looked up as he opened the door. For a moment, neither of them said anything. She stared at him with wide eyes, unsure, confused. "Dad?" she asked softly, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Adam's heart sank. It was as if she didn't recognize him, as if the man standing in front of her wasn't the father she remembered. The distance between them was palpable, and he suddenly felt like a stranger in his own home. "Hey, kiddo," Adam said, forcing a smile, but it felt hollow. "It's me." Lily stood up slowly, her eyes scanning his face. There was a long pause before she spoke again. "I don't remember you," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Adam felt the world tilt beneath him. The words cut deeper than any wound he had suffered in combat. He had come home expecting a reunion, a moment of joy, but instead, he was faced with the stark reality of just how much time had passed. He wasn't sure how to respond, or if he even could. Rebecca stood behind him, watching the exchange. Adam could feel her eyes on him, but it was Lily he needed to reach. This was his daughter, his little girl, the one he had promised to come back for. But now, standing in front of her, he wasn't sure how to reconnect, how to bridge the gap that had formed between them over the years. "I'm sorry," Lily whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't remember." The weight of her words hung in the air, and Adam felt the tears welling up in his eyes. How could he make up for the years lost? How could he undo the damage that war had done to his family? He sat down on the edge of her bed, unsure of what to say next. Lily sat down beside him, still staring at him with uncertainty. He wanted to tell her everything, how he had missed her, how he had fought to come back, how he had carried her in his heart every day. But the words felt stuck in his throat. "I'm sorry, honey," Adam finally managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry for everything." And in that moment, as he sat beside his daughter, he realized that the journey of returning home wasn't just about coming back to a house or a place. It was about finding his way back into the lives of the people who had moved on without him. And that was the hardest part.